The thing about apex predators is that we always know where the threats are. Always. It is written into our genetic code, burned into our instincts through millions of years of evolution. When you are at the top of the food chain, your survival depends on identifying danger before it identifies you. So when the human female walked into our combat theory class and sat in the back row without making a sound, every single predator species in that lecture hall turned their attention toward her, not away. Toward. That should have been our first clue. My name is Vekros, and I am a Thaxian. 7 feet of scaled muscle, retractable claws that can pierce titanium, and a bite force that registers somewhere between terrifying and catastrophic. My ancestors hunted megafauna across ice plains where the weak froze and the strong feasted. I do not frighten easily. But this human, this quiet little thing that barely cleared 5.5 feet, made every combat instinct I possessed scream at me to maintain visual contact. She did not swagger. She did not posture. She simply walked to the back corner seat, set down a small bag, and folded her hands on the desk. Her eyes swept the room once, cataloging exits and angles with a speed that seemed almost casual. Then she settled into absolute stillness. Predators do not sit still like that. Prey sits still, prey freezes when the hunter draws near. But her eyes, her eyes kept moving. Little micro-adjustments, tracking every motion in the room with the kind of lazy attention that suggested she was not worried about us at all. She was simply noting where we were in case it became relevant later. Beside me, Krath, a Vorlaxian hunter with 4 arms and more combat medals than sense, leaned over and whispered in that clicking language of his. "What is that thing?" "Human," I replied, keeping my voice low. "Class 4 Deathworlder. Recently admitted to the academy. She looks weak." "Yes," I said slowly, watching as she pulled out a datapad and began reviewing notes. "She does she not?" That was the problem. She looked weak. Soft skin, no visible claws, blunt teeth. Her frame was slight, her movements economical to the point of appearing lazy. Everything about her screamed easy prey, except for the way every predator in the room could not stop watching her. Professor Thane entered then, his massive Krogar frame filling the doorway. 10 feet of armored hide and cybernetic enhancements. A veteran of the border wars who had personally killed more enemies than most soldiers ever saw in combat. He took one look at the assembled class, and his eyes immediately locked onto the back row. "Ah," he rumbled, his voice like gravel in a metal drum. "Our human transfer student. Welcome to Advanced Combat Theory. I assume you have reviewed the prerequisite materials." The human looked up from her datapad. "Yes, sir." 2 words. Calm. Respectful. Utterly devoid of challenge or submission. Just acknowledgement. Thane stared at her for a long moment. Then he did something I had never seen him do before. He nodded, a tiny gesture of recognition between warriors, and turned to address the class. "Today we will discuss ambush tactics in urban environments," he announced, activating the holographic display at the front of the room. Specifically, how to identify and neutralize threats when operating in civilian populations. The lecture proceeded normally for the first 20 minutes. Thane outlined theoretical scenarios, asked questions, received the expected answers from students who had memorized the approved doctrines. Standard military academy material. Then he changed the scenario. "You are embedded in a population center," he said, modifying the hologram to show a bustling market district. "Intelligence suggests an enemy operative is present, but you do not know their identity. How do you locate them?" Krath raised one of his 4 hands. "Observe behavioral patterns. Look for individuals who are scanning the environment rather than focused on shopping or socializing." "Adequate," Thane replied. "But incomplete. What else?" Another student, a Vexler female with compound eyes and venomous spines, spoke up. "Check for anomalies in movement patterns, someone who maintains too much distance from others, or who positions themselves near exits." "Better," Thane acknowledged, "but still insufficient. What are you missing?" Silence. We had given the textbook answers. What more could there be? From the back row, a voice emerged, quiet, almost conversational. "You are looking for someone like me." Every head turned. The human had not raised her hand. She had simply stated a fact. Thane's expression shifted into something that might have been a smile if Krugar's smiled. The human set down her datapad. Everyone you described would be easy to spot, because they are trying too hard to blend in. A real operative would not scan, obviously. They would appear completely natural while maintaining total awareness. They would not avoid people. They would interact just enough to seem normal. They would not cluster near exits, because that is what everyone expects. They would position themselves where they have maximum options, which might be the middle of the crowd. She paused, and in that pause, I realized something terrifying. She was describing exactly what she had been doing since she entered the classroom. More importantly, she continued, you would never find them by looking for suspicious behavior. You would find them by being suspicious yourself and seeing who notices. Thane was definitely smiling now. Demonstrate. The human stood up in one fluid motion. For the past 25 minutes, I have been watching all of you watch me. Vekros has checked my position 8 times. Krath has not taken his eyes off me for more than 30 seconds at a stretch. The Vexlar student in the 3rd row has been tracking my heat signature with her thermal pits. Even you, Professor, positioned yourself where you could maintain line of sight to my seat. She was right. I had checked. Multiple times. And I had not even realized I was doing it. Predators recognize predators, she said simply. You all knew I was a threat the moment I walked in. You just could not articulate why. The room had gone very, very quiet. Thane crossed his arms, looking pleased. And what conclusion would an enemy operative draw from being watched so intently? That they have been compromised, the human replied. Which means they will either attempt to extract themselves from the situation or accelerate their mission timeline. Either way, you have forced their hand. Correct. Thane turned back to the class. This is what I have been trying to teach you for 3 semesters. Combat is not about strength or speed or firepower. It is about understanding the enemy's decision-making process and manipulating it to your advantage. He gestured toward the human. What is your name, student? Maya Torres. Well, Maya Torres, you have just demonstrated more tactical awareness than most of this class will achieve in their entire military careers. Tell me, what was your previous training? Maya sat back down, returning to that absolute stillness. I grew up in the Detroit reclamation zone. Several students exchanged confused glances. None of us were familiar with Earth geography. Thane, however, went very still himself. I see. And how long did you survive in the DRZ? 16 years. The way she said it, flat and matter-of-fact, sent a cold sensation through my scales. Thane clearly understood something the rest of us did not. Class dismissed early today, Thane announced abruptly. Except you, Torres, remain behind. We filed out slowly, none of us quite willing to turn our backs completely on the human female who had just made us all feel like prey in a room full of predators. I lingered near the door, curious. You know what the DRZ is? Maya said to Thane. Not a question. I do, Thane replied. I commanded a Krogar observation unit on Earth for 6 months. We were evaluating whether humanity was ready for Federation membership. One of my teams was sent into Detroit to assess combat capabilities of the local population. How many came back? 3 out of 12. Maya nodded, as if this confirmed something. The DRZ is not kind to outsiders, or insiders for that matter. Your file says you are 17 standard years old. You grew up in an active war zone between rival human factions, survived to reach academy admission age, and tested in the 98th percentile for tactical reasoning. Thane leaned forward slightly. I have trained soldiers for 40 years, Torres. You are the first student I have encountered who already understands what I am trying to teach. With respect, Professor, you are teaching theory, I lived practice. Precisely why I wanted to speak with you privately. Thane pulled up a holographic file. I am assembling a team for the combat trials next semester. Mixed species, practical scenarios, 0 artificial restrictions. Interested? Maya considered this for a long moment. Will the other team members have an issue with a human? They will have the same issue everyone in this room had. They will instinctively recognize you as a threat and respond accordingly. But they will learn to work with it. Or they will fail the trials. Then yes, I am interested. I left then, my mind churning with questions. What kind of environment produced a human who moved like that? What had she survived that made a room full of apex predators nervous? I returned to my quarters and did something I probably should not have done. I accessed the Academy's cultural database and searched for information about Earth's Detroit Reclamation Zone. What I found was horrifying. After the resource wars, large sections of Earth's major cities collapsed into lawless territories controlled by armed factions. The Detroit Reclamation Zone was one of the worst, a roughly 50 square kilometer area where the official government had no presence, and survival depended entirely on one's ability to fight, negotiate, or hide. Average life expectancy inside the DRZ was 23 years. Maya Torres was 17 and had survived her entire childhood there. The more I read, the more I understood why every predator instinct I possessed had screamed warnings when she entered the room. Humans were not just Deathworlders, they were survivors of a planet that had tried to kill them in every way possible, and when the planet failed, they built environments that tried even harder. Maya Torres had not learned combat theory from textbooks. She had learned it from daily necessity in an environment where mistakes meant death and hesitation meant being prey. We were apex predators who had evolved to hunt. She was something different. She was prey that had refused to die, that had adapted and learned and become something new. Something that understood both sides of the hunter-hunted equation, because she had been forced to exist on both sides simultaneously. And now she was sitting in our classes, learning our tactics, understanding our strengths. I should have felt threatened. Instead, I felt curious. Because if one human could survive what Maya Torres had had and emerge ready to learn more, what did that say about humanity as a whole? What kind of species produces individuals like that by accident? I had a feeling I was about to find out, and I was not entirely certain whether that thought excited me or terrified me. Probably both. The next morning, I arrived at Advanced Combat Theory 15 minutes early. I was not the only one. Krath was already seated, as was the Vexlar female, whose name I learned was Senna. Others filtered in, taking their seats with unusual attentiveness. We were all waiting to see if Maya Torres would return. She did, of course. Same time as before, same silent entrance, same back corner seat. This time, however, she nodded slightly to several of us as she passed. Recognition between warriors. Professor Thane entered precisely on schedule. Today we will discuss small unit tactics in hostile territory, specifically, how to maintain cohesion when operating beyond support range. The lecture proceeded, but everything had changed. Students who had previously recited memorized answers were now thinking critically, trying to anticipate the deeper lessons. And every time Thane posed a question, eyes would flick toward the back row, waiting to see if Maya would speak. She did, occasionally, never dominating the conversation, but offering insights that consistently revealed gaps in our understanding. Each time Thane would nod and expand the lesson in new directions. By the end of class, I realized what was happening. Maya Torres was not just a student, she was a teaching tool, a living example of what Thane had been trying to explain all along. Combat was not about physical superiority. It was about awareness, adaptation, and understanding, and humans apparently specialized in all three. As we filed out, I made a decision. I approached Maya before she could leave. Torres, I said, I have a question. She looked up at me with those disturbingly calm eyes. Yes, would you be willing to spar? Not officially. Just a private session. I want to understand how you move. She studied me for a long moment, and I had the distinct impression she was evaluating whether I was a threat or an opportunity. Then she smiled slightly. Tomorrow, Gymnasium 3. Oh, 600 hours, bring protective gear. I do not want to explain to the Academy medical staff why I injured a Thaxian. You think you could hurt me? I could not keep the skepticism from my voice. I outweighed her by at least 150 pounds. Her smile widened fractionally. Vekros, I survived 16 years in the DRZ. I did not do that by fighting fair or fighting strong. I did it by fighting smart. She walked away, leaving me to wonder what exactly I had just agreed to. I showed up the next morning, with full protective gear and a growing sense that I had made a terrible mistake. Maya was already there, stretching with an efficiency that suggested she had done this 10,000 times before. She wore light combat gear, nothing ceremonial or decorated, pure function. Rules? I asked. No permanent damage, stop when someone taps out. Other than that, whatever works. She finished stretching and stood. You ready? I nodded and moved into a combat stance. Claws extended, weight balanced. Maya did not take a stance. She simply stood there relaxed and alert, watching me with that same measuring gaze. I attacked first, a probing lunge meant to test her reactions. She was not where I expected her to be. She had shifted slightly, just enough that my claws passed through empty air where her torso had been a fraction of a second earlier. Before I could recover, something struck the back of my knee and my leg buckled. I spun, claws sweeping through the space she should have occupied. Empty air again. This time something impacted my ribs, not hard enough to injure but hard enough to make a point. We continued like this for 3 minutes. I attacked. She evaded. She countered when I was extended and vulnerable. Every strike she made was precise, targeting joints and nerve clusters, rather than trying to match strength against strength. Finally, I realized what she was doing. She was not fighting me. She was exhausting me, waiting for fatigue to make me sloppy. I stopped, breathing hard, and held up one hand. Yield. Maya stepped back immediately, no triumph in her expression. Just acknowledgement. You are strong and fast. But you fight like someone who has always been the biggest threat in the room. And you fight like someone who never was, I replied, understanding now. You compensate with technique and timing, more than that. She picked up a water container and took a drink. I fight like prey that learned to think. Every move you made I saw coming, because you have the luxury of being direct. I never had that luxury. So I learned to read intent, exploit openings, and end fights before they become contests of strength. That is terrifying. She laughed, an actual genuine laugh. Now you are starting to understand humans. Over the following weeks, word spread about our sparring sessions. Other students approached Maya, curious and cautious in equal measure. She agreed to train with several of them, always emphasizing adaptation over raw power. And slowly, something remarkable happened. The predator species who had initially viewed her as a threat began to view her as a resource, someone who understood combat from a completely different angle and was willing to share that perspective. By the time Professor Thane announced the combat trials teams, Maya Torres had become something unprecedented in Academy history. She was a human who had earned respect not through physical dominance but through tactical superiority and teaching, which was, I realized, the most human thing possible. They did not conquer through strength. They conquered through understanding, and they were terrifyingly good at it. The combat trials were held in the largest training facility on the station, a massive complex that could simulate everything from zero-gravity environments to volcanic hellscapes. Teams of 5 would face increasingly difficult scenarios over a 3-day period, with performance measured not by kills but by mission completion and survival rates. Professor Thane had assembled our team with what I now recognized as deliberate calculation. Myself, a Thaxian heavy combatant. Kreth, the 4-armed Vorlaxian with his incredible multitasking abilities. Senna, the Vekros scout with thermal vision and venomous strikes. Lorak, a massive Grendar, whose species was essentially living tanks with thick armor plating and regenerative capabilities. And Maya Torres, the human who weighed less than any of our equipment packs. Our first meeting as a team took place in a briefing room 3 days before the trials. Lorak was the first to voice what several of us were thinking. No offense to the human, he rumbled in his deep, grinding voice, but this seems unbalanced. 4 heavy combat specialists, and 1 small soft skin. How is she supposed to contribute? Maya, seated in her usual position at the back, did not react defensively. She simply pulled up a holographic display showing our personnel files. Vekros, you are strong and fast, but you have never operated without backup, she said calmly. Your combat record shows you prefer direct confrontation. Krith, your multi-limb coordination is impressive, but you panic when isolated. Your last solo training exercise ended in failure when you could not decide which weapon to prioritize. Senna, you are an excellent scout, but you have difficulty making command decisions. Every simulation where you were given team leadership resulted in delayed responses. She turned her attention to Lorak. And you are nearly indestructible, which means you have never learned to avoid damage. Your medical file shows 17 broken bones in the past year, all from situations that required finesse rather than endurance. The room had gone very quiet. She had just summarized our greatest weaknesses in under 30 seconds without notes, without hesitation. Now, she continued, my contribution is that I have survived my entire life by compensating for being the weakest thing in any given situation. I think fast, I adapt faster, and I know how to coordinate people who are stronger than me, because that is literally everyone I have ever worked with. So no offense taken, Lorak. But maybe save your judgment until after we see how the trials go. Lorak stared at her for a long moment, then made a huffing sound that might have been a laugh. Fair enough, human. Prove me wrong. Intend to. Professor Thane entered then, carrying data tablets for each of us. Your first scenario will be an urban extraction. Hostile territory, civilian population, one high-value target that needs to be retrieved alive. You will face opposition from multiple enemy units with superior numbers. Tactics and coordination will determine success or failure. He handed out the tablets. You have 72 hours to prepare. Use them wisely. Dismissed. We reconvened 6 hours later in a secured planning room. Maya had already pulled up schematics of the training facility and was annotating them with potential routes and choke points. Okay, she said without preamble, we need to establish roles immediately. This is not about ego, this is about using each person's strengths efficiently. She pointed at Lorak. You are our breacher and our shield. Anywhere we need a door opened or a position held, that is you. Your job is to take damage so the rest of us do not have to. Lorak nodded slowly. Acceptable. Senna, you are our eyes. You scout ahead. Identify threats. Feed us real-time information. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Your value is in what you see, not what you kill. Senna's mandibles clicked in what I had learned was agreement. Understood. Krath, you are our flexible response. 4 arms means you can handle multiple tasks simultaneously. You will carry extra equipment, provide covering fire, and adapt to whatever situation develops. Think of yourself as our utility player. I can do that, Krath confirmed, his translator rendering his clicking language into standard. Vekros, you are our primary combatant. When we need something dead quickly and efficiently, that is your job. You have the speed and lethality to end threats before they become problems. I inclined my head. And you? I coordinate. I watch the big picture, make decisions, and adjust our strategy in real time. I am not going to outfight any of you, but I can outthink most opponents, and that is how we win. It was a bold claim, but given what I had seen over the past weeks, I was inclined to believe her. We spent the next 3 days drilling, not physical training, though we did plenty of that. Maya focused on communication protocols, hand signals, contingency plans. She made us run through scenarios until we could coordinate without speaking, until each of us knew what the others would do in any given situation. Battles are won in the preparation, she explained during one session. Once the shooting starts, you do not have time to think. You react based on training and trust. So we train until reaction becomes instinct. By the time the trials began, I felt more prepared than I ever had for any combat scenario. Not because I was stronger or better equipped, but because I understood my role and trusted my team. The first scenario began at dawn. We were inserted into a simulated urban environment, complete with holographic civilians and automated enemy units. Our target was somewhere in a 3-block radius, and we had 1 hour to locate and extract them. Maya immediately established our formation. Senna moved ahead, using her thermal vision to scan buildings. Lorak stayed on point, his armored bulk deterring most threats. Krath and I flanked, covering angles. Maya stayed in the middle, monitoring everyone's position on her tactical display. 3 minutes in, Senna signaled contact. Enemy patrol, 6 units, automated drones with stun weapons. Standard doctrine would be to engage or evade. Maya's voice came through our communication links, calm and certain. Senna, mark their patrol route. Everyone else, hold position. We waited, watching the enemy patrol pass within 20 meters of our location. They moved on, unaware. Why did we not engage? Krath asked once they were out of range. Because fighting is loud and attracts attention, Maya replied. We are not here to rack up kills, we are here to complete the mission. Every fight we avoid is one less chance for something to go wrong. It was infuriatingly sensible. We continued moving, using the route Senna had identified as having the least enemy presence. Twice more we encountered patrols, and twice more Maya had us avoid engagement. I could feel my combat instincts screaming to attack, to eliminate threats. But I trusted her judgment. 15 minutes into the scenario, Senna located our target. A holographic representation of a VIP, cowering in a damaged building surrounded by enemy positions. 8 hostiles, elevated positions, overlapping fields of fire, Senna reported. No clean approach. Maya studied the tactical display for perhaps 10 seconds. Then she smiled, and it was not a nice smile. Lorak, how much noise can you make? Considerable amounts. Why? Because you are about to become bait. She outlined her plan quickly. Lorak would advance on the building from the west, drawing enemy fire and attention. His armor could withstand the stun weapons long enough for the rest of us to execute a flanking maneuver from the east. Once we had eliminated the eastern positions, we would converge on the remaining hostiles from 2 directions. You want me to just walk into their crossfire? Lorak asked, sounding more amused than concerned. You are the only one who can survive it, Maya said simply. And we need them focused somewhere else for 90 seconds. Can you give us that? Watch me. The plan executed flawlessly. Lorak charged the western approach like a living avalanche, absorbing fire from 6 different positions. The enemy concentrated on him, trying to bring down the obvious threat. Meanwhile, Senna guided Krath, myself and Maya through the eastern route. We eliminated 3 enemy positions in quick succession, using coordinated strikes that left no time for them to call for reinforcements. When we converged from both sides, the remaining hostiles were caught in a crossfire and neutralized within seconds. Total combat time was under 3 minutes. We secured the VIP and extracted through a route Maya had identified earlier. Total mission time was 37 minutes. With 0 casualties and minimal ammunition expenditure. When we returned to the staging area, Professor Thane was waiting with an expression I could not quite interpret. That was the fastest completion time I have ever seen for that scenario, he said. Most teams take the full hour and sustain multiple casualties. How did you do it? Maya looked at the rest of us, then back at Thane. We did not try to be heroes, we completed the objective efficiently. That is all. The second scenario was worse. A hostage situation in a station environment with failing life support. We had 40 minutes to locate and extract 12 hostages before the oxygen ran out. Enemy forces outnumbered us 10 to 1. We cannot fight that many opponents, Krath said, reviewing the briefing. This is impossible. No, Maya replied, staring at the schematic. It is just heavily weighted against direct combat, which means we do not fight at all. Explain, I said, curious despite myself. She pointed to the life support system controls. The scenario says life support is failing. It does not say we cannot manipulate it further. What if we accelerate the failure in sections we do not need, routing all remaining oxygen to the hostage location and our extraction route? Senna's mandibles clicked excitedly. The enemy would be forced to evacuate or suffer oxygen deprivation themselves. Exactly. We turn the environmental hazard into our weapon. They either leave or they pass out. Either way, we complete the mission without firing a shot. It was brilliant and slightly insane. The kind of plan only someone who had survived by being smarter rather than stronger would conceive. We executed it perfectly. Senna infiltrated the life support controls while the rest of us created a diversion. Within 10 minutes, half the station was in emergency oxygen conservation mode. Enemy forces evacuated the affected sections. Leaving the hostages lightly guarded, we retrieved all 12 hostages and extracted with 18 minutes to spare. By the 3rd day, word had spread through the academy. Our team was performing at levels that should have been impossible given our mixed experience levels. Other teams were watching our scenarios, trying to understand what we were doing differently. The final scenario was announced with unusual fanfare. A full-scale combat operation, our team versus an entire enemy battalion. The objective was to infiltrate an enemy command center, retrieve critical intelligence, and escape. Success parameters were simple. If we completed the objective, we won. If we were all eliminated, we lost. This is designed to be unwinnable, Lorak said, reviewing the briefing. They want to see how long we survive against overwhelming odds. Maya was quiet for a long time, studying the scenario parameters with an intensity that made me nervous. What if we do not infiltrate at all, she finally said. What do you mean? I asked. The objective is to retrieve intelligence from the command center. It does not specify that we have to physically enter it. She pulled up additional information about the scenario. The command center has external communication arrays. What if we hack into those arrays from outside and extract the data remotely? Krath made a complicated gesture with his forearms that indicated skepticism. The scenario designers would have accounted for that. The encryption will be impossible to break in the time we have. Not if we do not try to break it, Maya said, her eyes lighting up with that particular expression she got when she saw an angle no one else did. What if we just steal the entire communication array, physically remove it from the building and take it with us? We can decrypt it later at our leisure. There was a long silence, as we all processed this. That is completely outside normal operational parameters, Senna said slowly. That is the point, Maya replied. They expect us to play by standard tactical doctrine. They have set up the scenario to counter conventional approaches. So we do something unconventional. Professor Thane had said the trials would test our ability to think under pressure. He had never specified that our solutions had to be conventional. The final scenario began at midnight. We approached the enemy command center, through routes Senna had scouted, avoiding patrols with practiced ease. The building was a fortress, bristling with automated defenses and enemy personnel. We did not attempt to breach it. Instead, Lorak used his incredible strength to literally rip the communication array from the building's exterior wall while Krath and I provided covering fire. Senna guided us through an extraction route she had memorized. Maya coordinated everything, adjusting our path in real time as enemy forces scrambled to respond. The entire operation took 8 minutes. We were back at the extraction point with the stolen equipment before the enemy even understood what had happened. When Professor Thane reviewed our performance, he did something I had never seen him do. He laughed. Actually laughed. The deep rumbling sound that shook the observation room. You stole the objective, he said, still chuckling. I have been running these trials for 12 years, and no one has ever just stolen the objective. The parameters did not forbid it, Maya pointed out. No, they did not. Thane looked at our team with an expression that might have been pride. You have set a new standard for these trials, not through superior firepower or individual heroics, but through creative problem-solving and flawless coordination. He paused, his expression growing more serious. You have also demonstrated something more important. You have shown what becomes possible when different species stop competing and start cooperating. When we use our differences as strengths rather than treating them as weaknesses, our team scored the highest marks in combat trials history, not because we were the strongest or the fastest, but because we had learned to think differently, to approach problems from angles that conventional military doctrine did not consider. And at the center of it all was a human female who sat in the back row silent, who appeared weak and harmless, who every predator instinct told us to watch carefully, because she was dangerous. Not in the way we were dangerous, with claws and fangs and armor, but in the way that mattered most. She understood how to win without fighting, how to achieve objectives through intelligence rather than violence, how to turn disadvantages into advantages through creativity and adaptation. 3 months after the trials, I was having lunch with Maya in the academy cafeteria when Lorak joined us, his massive frame barely fitting into the seat. I have been thinking, he said without preamble, about what you said before the trials. About being the weakest thing in any situation. Yes? Maya prompted, taking a bite of her meal. Humans are classified as Class 4 Deathworlders. Your planet has higher gravity, more aggressive pathogens, more environmental hazards than most species' home worlds. But you are physically weaker than most species in the Federation. True, Maya agreed. So I looked into Earth's history. Your species has survived ice ages, supervolcanic eruptions, global wars, resource collapse, pandemic diseases that should have rendered you extinct, and not only survived, but thrived. Lorak leaned forward. How? How does a species that weak survive conditions that harsh? Maya smiled, and it was the same smile she had worn when planning our trial scenarios. Because we are not weak, Lorak. We just use different metrics for strength. Physical power is one type of strength, but adaptability is another, intelligence is another, cooperation is another, stubbornness is definitely another. She gestured around the cafeteria, at the dozens of species eating together. Every species here evolved to dominate their environment, through some specialized advantage. You evolved armor, Vekros evolved speed and claws, Kreth evolved multitasking. And humans? I asked. We evolved brains that could outthink our problems, because on Earth if you could not adapt fast enough, something would eat you. If you could not cooperate with your tribe, you died alone. If you could not learn from mistakes, you did not survive long enough to make many mistakes. She paused. We are persistence predators, Vekros. We do not give up, ever. We just keep coming, keep adapting, keep learning until we find a solution or die trying. That is terrifying, Lorak said. Yes, Maya agreed cheerfully. Yes, it is. Later that evening, I found myself thinking about the past months, about how Maya had walked into our class and changed everything without ever raising her voice or making threats. About how she had taken a team of individuals and forged us into something greater than our parts. About how humanity had applied for Federation membership and been accepted despite being relative newcomers to the galactic stage. We had been asking the wrong question. The question was not whether humans were strong enough to compete with established species. The question was whether the rest of us were adaptable enough to keep up with them, because humans did not conquer through strength. They conquered through being unkillable, through refusing to accept defeat, through finding angles and solutions that should not exist but somehow did. They were prey that had learned to think their way to the top of the food chain, and now they were teaching the rest of us their tricks. I pulled up my datapad and began composing a message to my homeworld government. They had asked me to assess human capabilities and report on whether the species posed a threat to Thaxian interests. My response was simple. Humans are not a threat. They are an opportunity. We should learn everything we can from them, because they understand survival in ways we have never had to consider. And in a hostile universe, that understanding might be the difference between extinction and expansion. I sent the message and closed my datapad. Across the academy grounds, in a small dormitory room, Maya Torres was probably reviewing tomorrow's lesson plans, or planning her next training session. Quiet, efficient, dangerous in ways most species would never recognize until it was too late. She sat in the back row silent, but every predator tracked her first, because deep down, in the instincts written into our genes, we all recognized what she represented, the future, and it belonged to those who could adapt. The humans had been adapting for millions of years. The rest of us were just starting to catch up. I smiled to myself and headed back to my quarters. Tomorrow I had another sparring session with Maya. She had promised to teach me something called using your enemy's momentum against them. I had a feeling it was going to hurt. But I was going to learn anyway, because if there was one thing humans had taught me, it was that pain was temporary but knowledge was permanent.